Hello, fellow late night lurkers. I'm Old Dad Guy. I tell scary stories so you can question every sound in your house at 2 a.m. You're welcome. No turning back now. Welcome back, fearless listeners. Old Dad Guy here. I'm super excited you decided to join us for episode 2, Knocks on the Ridge, a Sasquatch story. The final episode and conclusion to this story will be on Sunday, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We may not survive until then. Here you go. The morning after the rock throwing incident, I decided my plan needed, well, a plan. Sitting in camp, pretending the circling footsteps weren't happening, had lost its charm, and I'd burned through enough cocoa to know it wasn't going to solve my problems. If something out there wanted to play the let's see how long the human stays game, I figured it was time to start asking around. And that meant heading back into town. The bell over the diner door gave its usual dying bicycle bell chime as I stepped in. The same two guys were at the counter. Same coffee mugs, maybe even the same level of coffee in them. The waitress, I still don't know her name, looked up from her pad. Back early, she said, and I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or judgment. Needed more coffee, I said, taking my usual booth. Yours doesn't taste like it's been filtered through gym socks. She smirked like she was willing to believe the compliment. Pie? She said. Let's start with breakfast, I said, and then we'll talk pie negotiations after. She poured me a cup and stood there a second longer than necessary. You hear anything? That stopped my fork halfway to the plate. What do you mean? Up there on the ridge, at night. I thought about downplaying it. I thought about saying just the usual forest noises. But instead, I said, yeah, knocking. Footsteps. Something threw a rock at me yesterday. She didn't flinch, just made a small mark on her order pad and said, you ought to talk to Everett. Everett turned out to be a man who'd been wearing the same flannel since before I was born, judging by the way it had faded into a personal camouflage pattern. He lived on the edge of town in a squat house with a metal roof and a yard that looked like it'd been building a museum of rust, one piece at a time. The waitress had called ahead, or more likely she just said my name into the wind and Everett had somehow known I was coming. He met me at the door holding a mug the size of a flower pot and gave me a nod that counted as an invitation. You're the camper, he said. That's me. You been up near the old gas cuts? Yeah. And they know it. I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. Inside his living room was a tangle of bookshelves, old maps pinned to corkboard, and a wall of framed black and white photos that looked like they'd been taken with cameras that need cranking. In the corner, a wood stove ticked softly. He gestured me towards a chair that had the least amount of paper stacked on it. You've seen him yet? I hesitated. I've seen something. Big, tall, walking on two legs. Not a bear. He nodded like I'd passed some kind of entrance exam. They'd been here longer than the trees. Everett shuffled over to the cabinet and pulled out a file folder so thick it looked like it had swallowed 3 other folders. He spread a handful of papers and photos across the coffee table. 1934, he said, tapping the first yellowed newspaper clipping. Coal miners working a night shift heard screaming, not human screaming, from up on the ridge. Said it made their teeth hurt. Another clipping, 1959. Farmer's son swears he saw a giant covered in hair crossing the road at dawn. Sheriff told him it was just a tramp in a coat. Next, a Polaroid from the 70s. Blurry, sure, but the shape in the frame had that same too wide shouldered outline I'd seen the day before. Of course, Everett said, they got more active in the 70s. A lot of people camping out, a lot of new cabins going in. They don't like changes. I asked him the obvious question, what are they? He leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning under his weight. You can call 'em Sasquatch if you want. Some folks say they're just an ape we ain't cataloged yet. Others think they're different, older, smarter than we are in the ways that count up here. He tapped the table. They can see you without being seen, hear you before you think you're making noise, and they know the ridge like you know your own kitchen. I told him about the knocks. He nodded. That's talk. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's just them telling each other where you are. Either way, it's never for your benefit. What about the rock? I asked. That's telling you to leave. I waited for him to add a but or a probably. He didn't. Then he leaned forward. You still got your camp set up? Yeah. Then you follow 3 rules if you're going to stay. Don't leave food out, not even wrappers. Don't mimic the knocks unless you're ready for an answer. And if you smell them strong enough to make you gag, you're too close. The weather had shifted by the time I drove back toward the ridge. Low clouds rolled in, bruised and heavy, flattening the light. The forest looked tighter, like the trees had shuffled a step closer, together while I was gone. Back at camp, nothing had been disturbed, at least nothing obvious. But the log I'd been using as a seat had been shifted a few inches closer to the fire ring. I hadn't done that. I walked a slow circle around camp, scanning for prints. The ground was damp now, and near the edge of the clearing I found one. Not sharp, but still clear enough to make out the length and width. Longer than my boot, wider too. No tread, just a shallow depression with a rounded heel and taper toward the toes. The musk smell drifted in for a few seconds, then slid away again. That night, I kept the fire higher than usual. I sat with my back to the tent so I could see most of the clearing, sipping coffee like it was a talisman. The first knock came early. Still some light in the sky. Tap, tap, from upslope. I didn't answer. Then another set. Closer. I thought of Everett's rule and kept my mouth shut. Later, as the fire burned down, I caught movement just beyond the glow. A shift of shadows between 2 trees. It didn't come closer, didn't retreat, just stood there until the fire popped loud enough to make me flinch. And when I looked again, it was gone. Somewhere behind me, deep in the trees, something let out a low, rolling sound. Not a growl exactly, but enough to make my ribs feel like tuning forks. I decided then that Everett's don't mimic the sounds rule probably extended to any noise they made. When I finally crawled into the tent, I set my flashlight within arm's reach. Every time I started to drift, a sound would haul me back. A step, a brush of leaves, a shift of weight in the dark. At one point, I swore I heard breathing again. Long inhale, slow exhale. And this time, it was close enough to fog the side of my tent. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let my heart punch itself out against my ribs. Eventually, the sound moved away. Sleep came in short, restless strips after that, each one ending with the same thought. They weren't just passing through, they were keeping track of me. Dawn showed up, late and thin, like it had been warned off. I came out of the tent with the particular stiffness you earn by sleeping inside a nylon burrito and taking shallow breaths all night. Frost lace covered the leaves again. A crow made one rude announcement and then acted like it didn't know me. I did my usual perimeter walk with coffee in hand. The first cost revealed itself almost politely. My cook kit lid, which I always nest under the pan, was gone. Not rolled under a log or buried in leaves. Gone. There were no tracks inside camp except mine and the faint scuffs of something that preferred not to sign its work. 10 paces beyond the fire ring, I found the lid propped on a knee-high stump. Not dropped, placed. The metal smelled faintly of that musk, as if it had been carried against a chest or tucked under an arm. Point taken, I said, and held the lid up like a trophy for an invisible judge. Nice of you to do the dishes. I rinsed it anyway. The second cost arrived at breakfast. My food bag. A sober, adult-looking sack with a roll top and a smug buckle had been unrolled, opened, and lightly edited. Crackers remained. Rice stayed. The summer sausage was unwrapped and completely gone. The crinkly plastic sleeve tucked back into the bag like the world's most considerate raccoon had tidied up. Of the apples, one had a single bite missing, a crescent shape from the bright flesh, and then left on my cooler, as if to say, not for me. I stood there with an instant oatmeal packet in one hand, like a man contemplating his life choices. Fine, I said, we'll do oatmeal. I boiled water. The pot lid fit better than it ever had, which felt like the kind of small mercy you get before bad news. Halfway through the bowl, the morning broke into two equal parts silence and knocking. From up the ridge, three spaced taps. From down in the ravine, two closer together. Not a conversation I was invited to join. I cleaned camp like a person about to check out of a rental where the security deposit matters. Every wrapper into a zip bag. Every scent item hung high. Then, because I didn't like the idea of returning at dusk to find surprises, I stacked 3 sticks across the tent door flap in a pattern only I would use and pushed a flat river stone against the zipper pull. If they wanted to snoop, they'd do it whether I made booby traps or not, but at least I'd know. I told myself I'd be back by mid-afternoon. I told myself I'd hike the saddle and find the stream crossing, and maybe fish if my hands stopped being made of wood. I told myself a lot of things that sounded like a plan if you didn't look directly at them. The highlands, the ridge country, wears overcast like a second skin. By the time I reached the saddle, the sky had flattened into a pewter lid, and the air had that humming quiet you get right before a weather change. I cut toward the stream, deer sign everywhere, fresh pellets, the neat double score of hooves at mud's edge, brush tunneled by bodies passing through. Twice I saw a hind end flash away in that pogo stick hop. Normal, comforting, really. Then I came upon a different kind of sign. Two saplings, thumb thick and perfectly healthy, had been twisted together at head height until the bark ruptured and the cambium bled pale. The ground beneath them was a clean of leaf litter in a circle 3 feet across. A stone lay at the center of that circle, flat, heavy, not from this slope, carried, then dropped. None of this was for deer. I took a step back the way you do when you realize you've walked into the wrong room at a party, and everyone knows it but you. My brain offered a very reasonable suggestion: leave. Another part of me, the part that bought extra cocoa and planned a second night like an optimist, said stay the course. I compromised by getting small. I moved like a cautionary tale, slow and trying not to scrape against anything. At the stream crossing, I crouched on a rock and watched water thread itself through stones. On the near bank, boot prints from 2 days ago. Mine. On the far bank, that same oval impression I'd seen before. Pressure in mud, heel rounded, 4 foot wide. A faint suggestion of toes where the silt had lifted and then resettled. The stride on the far side of the stream had length in it. Whoever crossed there didn't heel drag like a tired person. They placed their weight and went. Not a bear, I said quietly, because repetition is a comfort and a trap. I didn't step in their tracks on the way across. I couldn't say why. It felt like I was walking across a grave. 200 yards beyond the crossing, something clacked to my right. Not a branch breaking, not a squirrel being dramatic. Stone on stone. Another reply, farther off. Softer, like a mouth against a hollow log. I stood with both hands on my walking stick and pretended I was studying moss. I saw nothing. That made it worse. By noon, a fine mist started up, enough to silver my jacket sleeves. I ate on the move. A protein bar the texture of gravel, and then angled back toward camp, telling myself I'd be a grown man and called early. I barely reached the old gas cut when a rock landed on the slope below me and bounced off. It wasn't big, baseball size, but it came from upslope, not down. I hadn't dislodged it. It had arrived. Message received, I said, not loud. We'll head home. I was talking to the ridge, or to my legs. Back at camp, my careful little tent door alarm had been considered. The 3 sticks were no longer in the pattern I left. 2 were arranged parallel, pointing toward the fire ring. The third lay across them like a serif on a letter I couldn't read. The flat stone on the zipper was gone. In its place was a different stone entirely, lighter, with a vein of quartz through it. And balanced on top of that, a single maple leaf, green and out of season. A chill went across my back that wasn't about temperature. I didn't unzip the tent right away. I walked a circle, forcing my brain to stay in gear while my hands wanted to unpack panic. When I finally pulled the zipper, there was nothing inside but the sleeping bag, pad, and the warm ghost of my breath in the fabric. No gifts, no scat, no ripped seams. Whoever came through wanted me to know that they could come through. The rain decided then to get serious. Not a downpour, just the steady soaking drizzle you can't negotiate with. I set a small fire and babied it with dry sticks scavenged from the undersides of deadfall. Smoke settled low and made my eyes sting. As the light went flat and then dim, the woods gathered themselves into tighter bundles. The slope above camp looked steeper. The ravine below looked deeper. The circle of firelight felt too small for the ideas inside it. That's when the third cost arrived, my hatchet. I keep the hatchet wedged into the log I sit on, blade buried, handle angled just so. It's dull enough to be honest, sharp enough to matter. I reached for it and found nothing but wet bark. I'd used it before lunch. I knew exactly where it was supposed to be. I stood very still and let the sensation wash through me. The particular helplessness of having a tool taken, not lost. I found it 5 minutes later, leaning against the far side of the log, with the head down in the leaves and the handle pointed towards the chair. Again, not dropped, set. Okay, I said. I'm trying on a tone that landed somewhere between neighborly and not okay at all. I get it. You can come closer than I think you can. Something answered by doing exactly that. From the upslope, beyond the first line of trunks, a figure moved in a shallow S-curve, never breaking the vertical lines of the trees, always between, always in the negative space. It didn't need the fire to see me. I had the sense you get when you're on stage and the house lights are 1,000 eyes. I didn't stand up because I couldn't find a reason that felt like a good idea. I kept my hands where the fire could see them, palms up on my knees in some dumb human approximation of, I'm not a problem. The shape paused behind a poplar, and then, and I swear this, a long arm reached out to touch the trunk with an open hand. 5 fingers, not a paw, not a stump, a large hand pressed to bark. Just a second, then gone. A second shadow moved, not as tall, built differently. The first stepped away and the second flowed into the space it left. A relay. My shoulders crawled with the knowledge that the circle of watchers might be a lot wider than the two I could almost see. The smell came on a low breeze, stronger now, edged with something bitter that snagged at my throat. I turned my head slightly toward the ravine and nearly swallowed my tongue. Down there, at the very edge of what the fire could risk and still be called light, something was crouched. It wasn't looking at me. Its head was angled toward the slope where the two shadows traded positions. Its back was to me. The silhouette was all wrong for a person. The trapezoids of shoulders and back were too much. The arms were folded in front of the knees, not on them. When it rose, not startled, not fast, it did so in one uncoiling that never looked like a person standing up from a squat. It was like watching a tent pole lift a canvas. I did not drink cocoa. I did not breathe loudly. I sat with the kind of stillness you get in a waiting room when your name is about to be called and you have started silently bargaining with whatever runs the universe. Minutes passed in the way minutes do when your heart is a metronome set too fast. A light rain stitched the fire's edges. The shadows moved, not in, not out, just across. Once, a small stone clicked against the bigger stones of the ring, not thrown, just nudged by something testing the border. Look, I said, and my voice surprised me because it wasn't shaking. I am a bad snack, and a worse idea. I'm leaving in the morning. You win. My humor showed up late and said, lamely, you always did. From somewhere uphill, a single knock answered. It didn't feel like victory. When the dark had settled all the way into its chair, I banked the fire low and went to the tent because sitting in the open any longer felt like begging. The fabric sound of the zipper was indecently loud. Inside, I set the headlamp where I could grab it, slid the knife from my pocket, and put it where I wouldn't fumble it if I was in a hurry. The rain tapped on the fly with that irregular rhythm nature uses to make sure you never predict the next beat. I lay there and told myself to breathe slow. I told myself the night animals had honest business that didn't concern me. I told myself a story about a diner coffee that didn't dissolve plastic, about a waitress who would smirk when I told her I cut the trip a day short because the trees had opinions. Sometime past the hour when reasonable people are in their pajamas watching weather radar, a weight settled into the earth beside the tent. Not on the tent, beside it. Soil takes weight the way a mattress does. You can feel it without seeing it. A single step placed close, another behind my head. Whatever was out there moved with a patience I could not match. The rain hushed itself, or my hearing narrowed to a keyhole. Fabric brushed lightly where the fly doesn't quite cover the body. A fingertip, a leaf. The tent wall dimpled outward, then relaxed. A long inhale, the kind that speaks of rooms inside a chest I will never have. A slow exhale that fogged the mesh at my shoulder. Warmth came through the thin layer like an apology. I did nothing. I was an exhibit labeled "Do Not Tap the Glass." The breath moved away. The steps went with it. One, two, and then stopped. The night resumed its other jobs. For a long time, nothing happened, which is its own species of happening. Then the moon, which had been hiding behind a scrim of cloud, shouldered through for a minute and gave the fly a milky glow. In that light, a shape slid between tent and sky and erased the glow entirely. The silhouette was a shoulder and a head and a piece of arm, and it existed for 2 heartbeats, and then 3, and then it went down the wall like a hand sliding down a curtain, and was gone. No sound, no branch tick, just the moon returning like someone removing a hand from a lamp. I laid there and watched the fabric brighten again and tried to count to 10, and got only to 6 before starting over. At some point much later, minutes or hours, the same currency, fatigue pushed its thumbs on my eyelids, and I went down like a man who'd been overworked. I dreamed that I was in my childhood bedroom, and heavy steps were on the carpeted hallway. And when I opened the door, there was just a rack of coats that smelled like rain, which was worse than a person or a ghost because you can't ask a coat to stop. I woke to the sound of water easing through leaves and the dull light that means the sun is somewhere but indifferent. I unzipped and stepped out. half expecting to find a line of stone spelling a word I didn't know. The camp looked like a camp. The fire ring looked like a fire ring. My hatchet sat where I'd left it, where they had left it. A second maple leaf, also green, lay on top of the lid of the pot. I made coffee without ceremony and drank it too hot. Then I packed. Not frantic, not sloppy, quick. I took care with every coil of rope and every stuff sack because leaving a mess seemed like a statement I didn't want to be responsible for. The tent came down damp and went into the bag with a sound like a sigh. I scattered the last of the cold ash wide. I shouldered the pack and stood there an extra beat, listening. From the saddle, a single knock. Farther off, an answer. It didn't feel like a warning, it felt like an acknowledgement. Roll safe. I started down the old road toward the truck, and it occurred to me that the cost of staying had not been the lid or the food or the hatchet. It had been the exchange rate on certainty. I had arrived with a pocket full of it. I left with a few coins I wasn't sure would spend anywhere else. The road bent and the trees closed in, and I lost sight of camp. I didn't look back, not because I was brave, but because turning your head felt like a part of the game I didn't understand the rules to. I walked with my eyes soft, the way you do when you want to see motion and not get caught staring at the place where you'd expect it. Half a mile down, on a wet patch where runoff crossed the track, I found prints that weren't mine, headed the opposite way, up toward camp. Fresh. The edges hadn't slumped. The stride was longer than I could comfortably make. The 4 foot was so wide it pulled a small gasp out of me that I pretended was a cough. And just to the side of one big track, there was a smaller one. Not child small, just less. Two sets, moving together. I stepped wide around them and carried on. The truck appeared between trees like a magic trick that I had paid for. I unlocked it with hands that didn't fumble and loaded gear in a pattern that would have comforted an archaeologist. Before I shut the tailgate, I paused and took out the two maple leaves, the green ones that didn't belong to any season nearby, and laid them on the log where I'd sat. A tip for services rendered, a note in a language of gestures. In the cab, with the door closed and the key in hand, I let out a breath that I didn't know I'd been holding. I started the engine. The radio woke to a station I hadn't set. A slur of country and static. I put it on mute and let the hum of the engine be enough. As I rolled down the narrow road toward town, a shape crossed the track one bend ahead and vanished into the cutover. Not a deer, not a bear. It did not hurry. It did not look back. It simply moved from one side of its country to the other, and the forest accepted the motion the way a pond takes a stone. I did not follow. The truck didn't either. We headed for coffee and pie and the civilized ritual of pretending the world is always what it seems. At the edge of town, where the first mailboxes pretend to be bears and eagles and one baffling trout, I pulled over and sat with the engine ticking heat away. My hands smelled like smoke and wet leaves and something else I couldn't put a name to. I checked my food bag without meaning to, as if the sausage might have returned out of guilt. It hadn't. I told myself out loud that leaving was the right call. Then I told myself quieter that I wasn't done because the cost of curiosity is never paid in one payment. It's a subscription you forget to cancel. And the ridge, the long, watching spine of it, had not finished its story with me. A guy in a leather jacket told me if I gave him $100, after 6 weeks, he would pay me 500. Turned out to be a Fonzie scheme. Hey! Oh, that guy. Don't forget to tune in Sunday for the thrilling conclusion of Knocks on the Ridge, a Sasquatch story. You thought you were alone, didn't you? But they've been watching the whole time. Like, subscribe, and maybe they'll let you sleep tonight.